Hello everyone, and today we are going to take a look at the hottest and most secret deleted scenes of our favorite show. Recently, one of the animators of the amazing digital Circus showed us some of the cutscenes and so-called behind the scenes, and I was very surprised to see how interesting the new episode was. Let me show you all these scenes, and we will analyze and look at each of them together. And the first scene is the very beginning of this trailer. Remember how Pomni is sleeping at first, and then Caine brutally wakes up our girl? That's what I like about such videos, that we can learn the original vision of the author on this or that scene.
Is that how that normally works?
Shut up! I have so much to show you! Your little crying face left quite the little crying mark on the internet.
Even here we can see that in the original version of the room, Pomni looked quite different than in the final scene. At least we don't see the curtains that partially cover Pomni's bed. The trailer also showed a fragment that was an exact copy of a scene from the pilot episode.
I have so much to show you! Your little...
However, while in the trailer we see a perfect transition between locations, in the original version, the transition was supposed to be a full-fledged teleportation through the so-called wormhole. And of course I can't help but mention the digital Circus area, which just looks disgusting. But I have an assumption that this animator simply did not bother with the scenery, and focused more on the movements of the characters. I've talked a lot about Caine's eyes in the original, and I have to admit that I still can't remember why they look so creepy. Similarly, the scene we were shown after the presentation of the new characters, the sky in the background was supposed to look very dark, but in the end they decided to do it in the usual digital Circus style. And did you pay attention to Caine's hat? In the final version, it looks with a red stripe, but in the process of creation, the authors assumed that the stripe will be blue. And to be honest, the final version looks 100 times better. Then we were shown the funniest scene of the whole trailer. I think you have already guessed that I am talking about the moment when Caine turns into a stuffed animal.
I see.
But it's not just our administrator that's interesting in this scene. Take a closer look at the digital Circus tent. In addition to the main building, you can see some sort of small annex next to it. But for some reason, the creators decided to remove this building completely and put huge entrance doors in its place. Caine himself in his plush version looks very strange in the original version. The great and powerful artificial pet Bubble. What surprised me was that he came right out of Pomni's mouth.
How can we support the production of this cool new show?
Great question, Pomni. All merch sales go right back into funding the show and allow us to do bigger and crazier things!
Wowee! I'd become a pen if it meant getting sold to fund more wacky...
And in the original scene, he looks too rough, if I may say so. Just compare the original and the final version. In the original version, Bubble represents some blue substance, while in the final version, Bubble looks like a real soap bubble. Look how beautifully his body shimmers in the sunlight. I'm not even talking about the plush Caine's commercial. Now let's talk a little bit about Jax. Based on the previous behind the scenes, I realized that Kevin Temmer is responsible for the most complex animations on this character, and this shot was no exception. But I'm very interested to know what this mysterious fast food restaurant is. And using Jax as an example, it is very easy to explain the reason for such a long absence of a new episode. Just compare the original footage and the final version. Of course, such an improvement takes a lot of time and effort. Now let's take a look at some very funny, unfortunate shots that were permanently removed from the trailer of the new episode. And the first scene will be our introduction to the trailer. I can't imagine what happened to Pomni's face, but it's much more interesting to look at Caine's face. Caine's return from plush to normal is also accompanied by a weird scene where Caine looks a lot like a robot, and it's already very creepy. After watching this video, I think that Caine is definitely a man. Especially after seeing how sensual he dances, I had my doubts. Now let's talk about the process of creating 3D animation. Let's take a look at the scene in which Pomni, Caine, and Bubble participated. We think that it is not difficult to create such an animation, but just look at how much effort it takes to get Pomni to open his mouth correctly. On top of that, you have to animate the head and body movements correctly, and Bubble has to come out of Pomni's mouth. And then there's the endless attempts to find the best shot. Let me remind you of another fragment from the trailer of the new episode.
How that normally works?
Shut up! I have so much to show you!
In the process of creating this scene, I noticed how detailed the writers are about even small details, like hand movements. In fact, it is such nuances that distinguish a really high-quality and successful project from the various garbage created in one day. Well, besides the head, a very important aspect of Caine's movements is the movement of his head, and it seems that even the smallest details such as the contour of the gum are not too important. But our creators try to bring even such things to perfection, and to be honest, they do it very well. Today we are going to talk about deleted scenes, learn how our favorite show was created, see funny and sometimes scary photos of our characters, and much more. So I suggest you watch this video to the end. First, let's take a look at the process of creating Caine's movements. You will immediately notice how detailed our Caine is, even at this early stage, and you can see that when he moves, only his arm moves. I wondered for a long time why it was the hand, but if you look closely at even the first scene, it becomes clear that the emphasis of Caine's actions is on the hand. Even the next frame of our cutscene shows how much detail the writers put into that moment. Well, his head movements also make me laugh a lot. Remember the character's first introduction to Kaufmo? Just look at how detailed Kaufmo is. Every part of his body has been brought to perfection. But if you look at the original version, you can see that Kaufmo originally looked very different. He was smooth and had some colored spots instead of eyes. There's another interesting detail in this scene that we'll talk about in a few seconds. If you've guessed what I'm talking about, write about it in the comments. Take a closer look at Regatha's movements when she first saw Kaufmo. Her hands were certainly excited, but not enough to stand up. In the original version, the process of her surprise lasts longer than in the final version, and if you look closely at her hand, you can see that it's rising. But for some reason, that element was removed in the final cut. Let's go back to the scene where we meet Caine. We have frames from the original animation of this scene. You can see that Caine has already been created, but if you look closely at his eyes, they seem very strange. One of them is completely blue and the other one is 80% green. And imagine if our administrator still had those eyes. I think he'd be one of the worst characters in the digital circus. And while the heart looks real, the brain looks like used chewing gum. And also these shots prove that the scene with Caine was shot very first, because in the final version we see the territory inside the tent of the digital circus. But in the original version, at the time of the story about the circus, we see only the backstage. And now let's come to the most complicated scene of the whole digital circus. I'm talking about a little fight between Zooble and Jax. You might ask me, what's so hard about that? But take a closer look at Jax's head at that moment. Gooseworx themselves said it took over 2 weeks just to do that scene. In addition to her, Kevin Temmer and many other animators were involved in the creation of this scene. This is how it turned out when several animators worked together, but as far as I know, Gooseworx did not like the variant with the disappearing head, and it was decided to redo this scene a little bit, which is the final result you see on the screen now. However, Zooble's movements didn't change at all. Now let's take a short break from the video and talk about the various cursed photos that we have accumulated a huge amount of. The first one I want to talk about is Pomni, and this photo perfectly demonstrates the imperfection of the animation in the early stages. Or maybe this photo was shown to use on purpose? Look at the horror of the face in this photo. What happened to Jax's face? At this point, his eye is attached to his teeth and it looks very creepy, and his face in general leaves a lot to be desired. We also get to see the original version of Jax in this scene. You can see that it was already the final part of the animation preparation. But what interests me the most is this photo. The authors themselves prove that this scene was recreated from an old but very famous meme with a girl and a burning house. And this is just a funny shot of Gangle with her body split in two for some reason. But I'm pretty sure that's just a bad shot of that scene. I can't even explain what's going on in this shot. It's just that Jax has turned into a very strange creature. Let's take a break from the photos and go into some very interesting details about some of the scenes. Probably the most frequent guest of this video is the welcome scene that introduces us to Caine and the circus in general. So I have footage from different angles of that scene.
Welcome to the amazing digital circus! My name is Caine. I'm your ringmaster, and I'm here to show you the most jaw-dropping, heart-stopping, mind-bending paraphernalia you've ever laid your eyes upon! Isn't that right, Bubble?
That's right, Caine. I can't wait to see what you've got cooking up for today.
Well, let's not waste any time.
Also, I think a lot of people will be interested to see the creation of this scene and the interaction of the characters from different angles.
We found the Zooble hole.
Cool.
How is Kaufmo doing? I hope he's not still mad at me for not laughing at his jokes.
Oh, he's doing great. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen him this happy before.
Well, it's good to know he hasn't completely lost his mind.
He actually asked me to give you this.
Whoa!
And to be honest, I couldn't go on living if I didn't show you the first meeting of Pomni and Regatha with the abstracted Kaufmo in its original form, because at least for the sake of the bald Kaufmo, it's worth watching to the end.
Might be that terrible thing I was talking about earlier, when you reach your breaking point? Huh? Okay, wait. Maybe there's still time to fix him if we get Caine. Whoa, Kaufmo! Listen, I know we didn't always get along, like when you called me out for fake laughing at your jokes. I swear I really did think they were funny. I was just having a bit of a bad day.
And now let's look at the process of creating this teaser, which is really our introduction to the characters. You can see that Kinger's eyes were originally made completely different from the final result, but all his movements were kept. Zooble also underwent a huge revision because originally her eyelids were supposed to be purple, while in the final version, they are pink. And of course, her body changed from metallic to a beautiful yellow color. We already talked about Caine's eyes, but look at the quality of Bubble. Gangle hasn't changed much either, but it's noticeable that they did a very good job of animating her tears and falling in general. And the scene with Jax and Regatha, or the introduction scene with Regatha, is a perfect example of quality post-production, because it is noticeable how Folo was the initial animation of movements and drawing of these characters, but once it came to the final cut, everything became so perfect that I do not even know how it can be repeated. Well, here Pomni decided to present himself as a master dancer, but it looks very funny. I also found a funny leak of Ragatha's face on the internet, if I may say so, because this concept art makes us laugh. But if we think more globally, this leak actually proves to us that there is nothing inside each of the characters. No organs, no tissues, no fluids of any kind. They're just digital shells, but where is their consciousness stored? I decided to make you happy and found 95%, if not all of the leaks and deleted scenes that have appeared since the pilot episode was released. I'm sure you haven't seen most of them. I hope you enjoy this video because it's really interesting and funny, and the first deleted scene is the pilot episode intro. What we got in the end is very different from the original idea of the authors. It's worth mentioning that the early version looks duller, but that's not the main thing. Remember what the original intro sounds like. It is very cheerful and funny, as if we were watching a children's show, while the first version was created more seriously. And its jazzy sound makes you think that the digital circus could have originally been created for an older audience. This song is no longer suitable for children's entertainment shows, but sounds like it should be played in serious nightlife venues. Some of you may like the original version, and some of you may like the final version, but let's all admit that the version we saw in the final version fits the mood that Gooseworx and the Glitch Channel team wanted to convey. And also for a long time on the internet has been walking around a small animation that shows the walk of all the characters. In fact, this leak does not contain any semantic load, and was shown to us only as an element of entertainment, because while Jax, Regatha, Gangle, and Pomni go the usual step, Kinger as if gliding on the surface, or flying, here you can decide only you. And his dance, because you can't call it anything else, would definitely become popular on social networks. But the funniest walk is definitely Zooble's walk. Just look how she walks, and in some moments you can see that she constantly tucks her leg, apparently the construction that she is far from perfect. Let's take a little break from the video and take a look at the various leak photos, as we have a huge number of them. In this picture we see mostly different scenes with Regatha from the pilot episode, but there is a very cute version of Regatha hiding in the corner, as I think this is how she looked like as a child when she first joined the digital circus. But it could be that the characters in this place don't age at all, because they're just a digital illusion. Then it's just an early version of Regatha that didn't fit the concept of this series. Well, that brings our video to a close. Bye bye everybody. Love you.